This is a really interesting drawing by Paul Gauguin called Vision After the Sermon, or also Jacob Wrestling with the Angel. Paul Gauguin was a character that in the art world, a real guy, but an interesting character. This is one of his most famous works. He's associated with post-impressionism, was friends with Van Gogh. They had some falling outs, and he went off to Tahiti to paint. For a while there, they shared a sort of house studio situation. So he's an interesting guy. It was made in Pont-Aven, Brittany, which is North France. And in a letter to the artist Van Gogh, he told him about this, and he said he'd written the letter to tell him about it. He had just painted, this is a quote, a religious picture badly executed, but it interested me to do it, and I like it. Also, that for me, the landscape and the fight only exist in the imagination of the people praying after the sermon. So, this is an idea of space where this part is imaginary in the minds of these people. It's got an interesting use of color, and he says it's badly done, but if he knows that, it seems almost like it's an intentionality to it, which I actually believe. So these women here are in traditional Breton costume. They've just heard a sermon, presumably delivered by this priest over here. And we glimpse him down there at the lower right. In the upper half of the composition, he evokes this sort of vision that he's talking about. That the woman heard a sermon from Genesis 32:24 through 32, which is a biblical narrative about Jacob, of one of the original patriarchs of the Jewish faith, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob being Abraham's grandson and Isaac's son, who this is the scene in which he wrestles an angel to have a blessing, and his name is changed from Jacob to Israel, which the country and nation of Israel is named after him because his sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. So, to emphasize the contrast between the real woman and the spiritual experience they imagine, he's divided the composition with this diagonal trunk. It's like abruptly there, which is interesting. It's supposed to be an apple tree. You can't quite tell that, but that's what everyone says about it, which brings in ideas of the Garden of Eden. And then this is their sort of dream and their prayerful states. They're kind of praying and sitting and reflecting. It's interesting because there's a patterning of the hats throughout the space. The shape of it moves your eye around. And here, when we would get out of the picture, this face looks back in and brings us back in. Same with this here. The diagonal trunk would draw us out, but then he has people in the greenery drawing us back in. Something like a cow over here, probably blocked out. And really strong use of this red in the background, which is a complementary color opposite on the color wheel of the green. So it brings this vibration. And then purplish blue and the angel with the yellow wings, so that's opposite of each other. And he uses interesting color in the faces. There's a blue for shadowing and an orangish yellow faces. So he's using a lot of opposites on the color wheel to make neutrals and to add shade. But he really flattened out the landscape a lot. The women have modeling to them because they're like supposed to be the real people and this is the vision. This has less modeling, it has some, but the landscape is flattened out almost like a play in some way. He also wrote he was pleased with the result, that I think I have achieved a great rustic and superstitious simplicity in the figures. The whole is very severe. So he's purposely using this dream of wrestling figures against this striking flat red background to get this rustic, dreamlike quality. And this spiritual experience, he's trying to create a mysterious idea. This experimental composition became a manifesto for a new approach to painting. Surprising color, bold outlines, and deliberately flattened shapes set a new benchmark for the artist's freedom to distort and exaggerate for expressive purposes. He's interested in art based on the world of ideas and imagination rather than observed reality, and so he's combining the real and the imagined. He was looking to move beyond the impressionism of his earlier work, and he stays in Brittany in 1886 and 1888, where important stages in the formation of his new, more simple style that he continued on with. He's working closely with his young friend Emile Bernard and was talking to Van Gogh by letters, and Van Gogh was in RLA at that time. He's deliberately distorting form and color, and there's a rejection of not just conventional painting, but also a more modern naturalistic style such as Impressionism. So he's rejecting history painting, mythology painting, all that, which the Impressionists were also rejecting, but he's going even further and rejecting the dabbing impressionistic style that's still trying to capture naturalism of light in some ways, and maybe you could say Seurat's pointillism as well, for this idea of a vision, spiritual vision, and a rough kind of primitive execution, really getting the paint on there. Not using impasto though. Vision of the Sermon was shown at various exhibitions from 1889 onward, and it established his reputation as an innovator. It became an important example for younger artists looking for new directions in art, and today it even remains a challenging picture. I've seen it in person. It's a pretty cool picture to see in person. Gauguin himself was not surprised when shortly after he completed it, he twice tried to donate it to local churches, but his offers were firmly rejected. He wasn't surprised about that because he knew he was breaking with things. His highly original paintings pretty profoundly influenced modern art in the 20th century. He's described now as, like I said, a post-impressionist, but he was inspired to paint by Pissarro, who is an interesting impressionist. I really like Pissarro's work, but he developed a more symbolic style using color to express meaning, not just capture the natural world. There were other traditions outside of the Western art world that and culture that influenced him, especially Japanese printmaking, which was commonly an influence of a lot of post-impressionists and impressionists, because the paper that things were shipped in had these beautiful designs on them, and you could think of a lot of works with cherry blossoms and mountains and printmaking being a really influential thing. So there's a lot to study here and capture, and I think he uses rhythm and repetition of shape very well, and then eye movement, and then he uses really interesting value and color relationships, the use of white and black, and then modeling even within the black these lighter tones, and the way he uses blue and oranges to create shadow. Very interesting work. I really enjoy this work quite a lot when I saw it in person. So block it out. Think about the negative spaces when you're blocking out. This is negative space, not positive shape, which you talked a bit about. He's made these almost tangible by making them red, and you could actually use blocking out the location and shapes of these negative spaces to help you create the picture. What do I mean by that? All of these are negative space, not positive shape. But he's used them in a really interesting way where they become, the way they've become flattened, but they're not part of the figure, allows us to see the space in a really interesting way. You could use that to help you recapture this. Think about also how he's using line and paint and then breaking with it. Interesting use of that. Breaking between parts that feel like they have an outline and then they go into value blocks and shapes of value and color. So that's interesting. He breaks down and makes things flat, and then he adds modeling of values back and forth to make an interesting picture. So a lot to study here, a lot of interesting stuff to get into, and do your best within the time to really capture this. I know it's in color and paint. The next ones I'm going to have you guys draw, I do show them to you in color and black and white, and then have you do the black and white version. But for this, I think it still works pretty well to draw it in color and see it. Okay? As ever, if you have questions about this or any assignment, reach out to me in all the ways I can be reached. Email, preferably Canvas inbox, question and answer cafe, project in progress postings, comments. We have a lot of ways to contact me pronto. I comment on a lot of your works, but I don't know if you guys always see them. You should be subscribing to assignment comments and checking assignments where I give you feedback. I don't think people are always doing that. All right, guys, take care. I'll talk to you soon.